All right. Thank you, Josh, so much for being here. Just wanted to tell you how much we appreciate you and we appreciate your time. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and we'll kick this off.
Hey everybody, I'm Josh Marenger. I'm Vice President of DS Tech. We're a new charter technologies platform company. I have been at DS Tech for over 21 years. So I've done everything from dial-up networking to you name it. But now my focus is cybersecurity. So over the last few years, I've gotten a handful of certs, CISSP, CISM, CCSP, really focusing on the security aspect of things. Our largest vertical, our client vertical, is banking. So got to the point where it's necessary for me to really focus on that stuff. And yeah, that's where I'm at in a nutshell.
Well, and I think it's interesting, right? Because we're nerding out on Linksys. I mean, I'm sure if I made the noises for a modem, you could tell me what baud rate I attached to, right? So that's where we're coming from as nerds. And now the idea of how do we translate what we see into something that resonates with people who hold budget or make risk-based decisions. Like, if I like to imagine that on the Titanic, when they were heading towards the iceberg, the lookout was trying to warn them, but just didn't know the right word for iceberg. And I feel like that sometimes when I'm in cybersecurity talking to small businesses or business people.
Yeah, I mean, really anybody that's non-technical, they don't understand the ones and zeros unless there's a dollar sign involved, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, what the reason we're here today is to kind of have you show folks how you use framing conversations in a discovery process to help your customers kind of translate from that bits and bytes to the dollars and cents.
So yeah, here's obviously the threat captain portal. So typically if I'm going to sit down with somebody, again, our biggest vertical are banks and credit union clients. So let's just say we're gonna talk to ABC Credit Union today. Um, we'll say they're a client. They are a financial services. Typically the ones we service are in this fairly small financial institution, 51 to 200 employees. Obviously, we're in North America. We can throw a revenue number in here. Um, typically at this size, they're probably at about say 100 endpoints. Jane Doe. And then, Threat Captain automatically makes an assumption here of how many records a client like this might have. In the conversations I've had, nobody has really disputed this, so I think it's somewhat accurate. And then if we want, we can dig into some of these specific data types, but again, Threat Captain predetermines a lot of this based on what we fill in up here, right? So typically you don't have to mess with that too much. So now we've got our financial institution in here, right? So let's dive in. So I actually tend to start more toward the middle, right? So typically with financial institution, they're required to have cyber health insurance. So this part isn't quite as relevant to them, but we can kind of still go through it. So we're gonna assume that they have most of these things, right? We're not gonna bore everybody with every one of these things, but let's assume they've got almost everything here.
Are
And
you
I
doing
missed
this
one.
in front of the customer or are you doing this before you meet with them?
So it depends, right? I mean, if this is a client that I know really well, I'm not going to bore them by sitting down and asking them all these questions if I know the answers, right? If I don't know the answers, that is a different situation. But um, if this is a long-term client of ours, I generally know the answers to these questions and don't necessarily have to ask them because typically they're services that we are providing them, right?
Hmm.
So you can see here, this client has pretty good cybersecurity posture because I selected yes for almost everything. They've got a pretty solid insurance score telling me that, they're probably going to get pretty good premiums. They're likely not going to get rejected, et cetera. Always got to be a little careful with the insurance conversation because I'm not a licensed insurance agent, so I can't really tell them what kind of coverage to get or anything like that legally, but just kind of helps them understand what their posture looks like, right?
Right.
So then, we also come down to the breach likelihood assessment. So this is based on CIS. So again, not really going to bore everybody with going through every one of these questions, but again, let's assume this institution has just about everything. Yeah, so that's kind of the data entry portion of it, right? So if this was a prospect or something, I would totally sit down and ask all these questions. But if this is, again, a client that we know super well, we just fill out a form and have the conversation then, right? So now the cool part is now that we have this data in here and we understand what the client's security posture is, now we can start running some scenarios in it and almost gamifying it a little bit. And I actually like to do this as part of tabletop exercises as well, which kind of makes it more real for people. So we come back up here and go to the financial impact simulation. This is where it really gets real. Let's talk about if a situation happened. So again, this is the stuff that we filled out earlier, some of it. So let's say this institution, they get phished, and this is a major breach, not having a good day.
You're nice. I usually do minor breaches because I'm afraid people won't believe the big number. And you're like, no, let's go. Let's show them the truth.
So I did this tabletop exercise recently, so that's why this is fresh in my mind, where I said, you guys got, totally whacked, and a ton of your customers or your members' data, as they call it, those were exfiltrated, right? So say they've got $1 million in insurance coverage, which that usually is a question we have to ask. Downtime and then cost per hour of outage. So let's run that. And we can kind of see here, one thing I always like to point out is, this data is based upon the IBM cost of data breach report that was out last year. I go back to the thing from the 80s. Nobody got fired for buying IBM, right? It's kind of the same thing. You say IBM to a client, they go, "Oh, I know that name. They've been around forever. I trust what they say." Versus just, Bob's data breach report isn't going to hold much weight, right? And so, you kind of see this number. Well, this is $5 million breach cost, and some people go, "No way does it cost that much." Well, there's a bell curve here, right? I mean, you might be here where it's 2.6 million. Most people are going to be here. Some people are going to be way up here. But for the sake of argument or the sake of the exercise, let's say, okay, you're at the top of the bell curve, your average 5.1 total breach cost. And so we can kind of see here, this is before any controls or anything that we filled out earlier. So we've got, the various aspects of what a breach or an incident would cost. So we've got post response, in the banking world, you've got all kinds of ramifications there, right? We've got the investigation, notification. If people's data has been leaked, you've got to tell them legally. And then business downtime, right? So we've got total costs, hard costs, and then cost per device. But where I think it's fun is to come back down here and say, okay, your baseline risk in this situation is $5.1 million. You've got 4.8 or essentially reduced. Your risk has been reduced because of the controls that are put in, whether it's something we're offering or whether that's something they're doing themselves or getting from someone else. And then we look at, the insurance situation. So, because this client is in pretty good shape, because of everything that we're doing, the residual risk is $0. And so what was interesting though, is I worked through this tabletop exercise recently with a client, and in the scenario we ran through was they said, "Well, wait a minute, you said we got phished, but then you checked the box that we get phishing training and we have, all these
Mm.
other controls. And I went, you know what? You're exactly right. Controls aren't perfect, right? A lot of times they rely on humans to overlook what's going on. Uh, there's different phishing attack vectors. All these things can happen, so controls can fail, right? And so that was interesting to me. And so we actually went back through and we said, I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but we said, okay, let's say this control failed, and this one did, and this one did. Now, let's go back and see what that looks like. We still have this 5.1 baseline. Now this number is different. This is only 3.8 million. Now we've got the $1 million in insurance risk reduction. Now your residual risk is 364K because some controls failed. And you can see the light bulb go off. And they were
Yeah.
like, oh, that's super interesting.
You know what's
Uh,
cool about that too, though, is you had so maybe some controls failed, but because you did your effort to install them and configure them, doing all that, the likelihood of insurance paying that 1 million is still very, very high. So
Agreed.
even if a control fails, there's still value in having that control there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly right. And so then the conversation turns to, well, how do we prevent these controls from failing? Do we need more oversight? Do we need more process? Do we need maybe a different product? Um, you know, what have you to try to prevent these things from happening? And that's the whole point of the tabletop exercise is to evaluate how can we be better? What can we do differently? And let's actually put a number on it. Um, so then, the other thing that's interesting is, maybe not so much for a financial institution, but for your average SMB, you run through this and they go, well, 364K, or if this is $1 million or whatever the residual risk ends up being, they're like, what? That's not even a real number to me. We might as well be talking about the Powerball being $1.25 billion like it is today. Like that doesn't even make sense to them. And so they think you're just blowing smoke at that point, right? Um, but there is another tool in Threat Captain called the Risk Amortizer. And so what I like about this one is we can dump some numbers in here and say, okay, let's say it is that 364K, and let's just say, for the sake of argument, Mr. Customer, this happens every 10 years. Like we can agree something might happen every 10 years, right? Oh, sure, that seems reasonable, right? If we actually amortize that and look at the annual loss expectancy, now we can look at a monthly basis. You basically have a monthly risk cost of $3,000. So you're getting a $3,000 bill every month, whether you know it or not. Eventually, the piper is going to knock on the door and want this number, and that's what it comes out to. Um, so then you can have the conversation of, okay, well, now what are the costs to reduce the risk? Whether it be more time to establish and achieve process, whether it's more tooling, whatever it is, all those things have costs to them, whether they're paying the MSP or internal staff or what have you, those things have costs. Um, so if we can kind of look at it and go, well, if we implement some of these things and that reduces our risk by 75%, now our monthly bill is $758 instead of 3K. Um, and if we can achieve that for less than $2,200 a month, that's a net win.
There you go. Does that talk track work when you talk to a customer? Do they have aha moments when you kind of present it that way?
Yeah, they do seem to understand it. I mean, when you're talking about actual numbers and it makes it real versus
Mm.
this nebulous thing, we don't know what it is, we don't know what the impact is going to be, we don't know what we have in place and what risk that's going to reduce. We can't put numbers to risk reduction with new things until we run through an exercise like this. And we start doing it, people understand like, oh, this isn't just my MSP trying to fish for more revenue. They are actually reducing my business risk. Um, and the bad month that you're going to have if something like this happens, or if and when something like this happens. So, I had another situation with a different client where I did a tabletop exercise with them, and the tabletop exercise was, we're in Upper Michigan, very cold up here. We have winters, and the exercise was an ice storm rolls through, and the power at your main location is down for a day. What do you do? And I'm sitting at the table with everybody, and everybody up to and including the president and CEO is saying, you know what? There's nothing we can do about it. We're going to close our doors.
Whoa.
And as I'm walking through the scenario, it's okay, it's 4 p.m. now. You still don't have power. What do you do? Well, we're still closed. Okay. Went through the exercise, power came back on, it was all jolly, right? But then 3 months later, the exact situation played out. There was an ice storm and they had no power. And an hour and a half into that power outage, the president slash CEO was throwing a fit about, we're down, look at this reputational damage, we can't service our clients, all these things. And I'm looking at this, and their internal IT person is looking at this going, we just talked about this, and now it's real. Now you're actually feeling the pain of it. And I didn't have Threat Captain available to me at that time, so I couldn't put a number on it to make it real for that conversation. Maybe if I did, it would have been a different conversation, but yeah, in the end, that customer is getting a generator for their main location now. But they were able to justify that expense now that they actually felt the pain of it. So that's not something we did. We're not electricians, but they were able to do something that was able to reduce their financial risk.
That's
And
really
these
cool.
are existing clients, correct? So
Correct.
if they didn't necessarily, I mean, I'm sure that you already had some rapport and some trust, but I can see how that would really amp that up a good bit when you're able to actually show it a number on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. And they weren't angry at us about it, but they were just more upset with the situation.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, I mean, definitely helps if you can, kind of prove the point, and if they can be more proactive. I mean, if they could have gotten a generator last summer, that would have been preferable because then they would have been down for a day. And the thing with ice storms is when the power goes out, it's up and down constantly. So you come up, you don't know when you're going to go back down again. When you go down, you don't know when you're coming back up again. Usually there's a wind involved. It's, they're kind of interesting situations.
But we're also seeing that a lot of these cybersecurity conversation goes to business outage conversations. So the idea of being able to talk about downtime, I'm going to throw a hot take at you, and you can call BS and tell me what you think. I personally believe that IT exists so that a business can function and produce its result, and cybersecurity exists to make sure IT doesn't get broken and doesn't get disrupted. And so, whenever I talk about cybersecurity, I love bringing it back to downtime because, look, my job is not necessarily to keep the bad guys out. My job is to make sure that you can keep running and doing your mission come, ice storm or high water.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about business enablement, right? I mean, it's whatever we have to do, whether that's preventing the situation in the first place, whether that's responding to the situation accordingly, or advising on alternate workflows, or what have you. It's not always necessarily about the widgets and the hardware and all of that stuff. Sometimes it's literally just sitting down and saying, some of these things are non-preventable. What can we do in response? And downtime is real. I mean, people like to minimize it and think it's not a big deal, but like we were talking about with the one customer, when they actually were down, it was real because they had, I don't recall exactly, but 50 to 75 employees standing around that couldn't work, that are still getting paid. They can't serve their customers. Maybe they were losing out on a mortgage or a loan. I mean, you miss out on mortgage payments as a financial institution for 30 years. That doesn't feel too good, right?
Well, you're really making the business case for governance, you know? like, hey, we put the thing in place, but we're under resourcing maintenance, we're under resourcing da 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 da. I find those conversations were great for mid-size or larger clients. When you go down into the smaller businesses, that maybe are not as sophisticated. They're very good at their business, but they maybe are, don't have the kind of institutional controls larger companies have. How do you change how you talk to them, or is it basically the same?
Yeah, it's a little bit different in that, for our larger clients, generally we approach these things as all you can eat. So it's kind of a fixed cost
Mm,
for them versus a lot of the smaller clients, it's more we're providing the tool set and things on top of that are T&M, right? So if it's a patch is missing and we need to take some intervention, or if it's updating the firewall firmware, whatever it is, we're charging T&M for that. And there are times where customers will come back and go, I didn't ask you to do that. What are you doing? And so
mhm.
then we can have these conversations and go, okay, this is what happens if we don't do this. And this is maybe we charged you half an hour to update the firmware on your firewall and reboot it. Um, but if there was a 0 day on that firewall and all of a sudden there's a major incident and it cost you $1 million, you're not going to be too happy with me. So this helps prove that conversation as well.
So when I was doing this stuff back in the day, I used to say my job was to be Yoda and not Luke Skywalker, right? My job was to be the advisor to the hero, and the hero was the business. But dang it, sometimes I just want him to do what I told him to do. So when you're Yoda and Luke still goes off and does whatever Luke wants to do, are you tempted to hit them over the head with data? How do you handle when a customer goes rogue and decides to do something that you don't necessarily feel is in their best interest?
Yeah, I mean, those are always difficult conversations, and really it depends on the degree of what they're doing. If there's some small thing that they don't want to do, or maybe it's a more cutting edge thing that they don't want to do, certainly we can talk through some numbers, and if they say they accept the risk, that's fine. But then there are other scenarios where some clients don't want to do almost anything,
Yeah,
and and those are the scenarios where if they don't want to listen to what I think is reasonable, they don't want to listen to the data, they just want to save money tomorrow. There are situations where we just say, you know what, this is not a fit for us because I don't care what you tell me, I don't care what you sign. If there's an incident and you think that we are the ones that need to respond to it, my name's going to be in the mud no matter
that's
what.
right.
It's
That's right.
always, Josh was supposed to protect me and he didn't, but they forget about the conversation from 3 years earlier where they declined the thing that was the attack vector, right?
I think we had one last question for you, and then we can all celebrate the uh, the outcomes of having these conversations in a different way. How's that changed your personal experience when you trying to help uh your customers by leading with some of these business metrics and being able to be equipped with some of this kind of visuals? Has that changed much for you?
Yeah, I feel like if you can speak their language, uh, that's really where you can get a lot more trust with a client. You're not just coming to them necessarily and saying, here's the next SKU that I want to sell you, and I'm not even gonna tell you why. It's
Mm.
just some nerd thing. You should buy it. Versus if you can actually sit down and legitimize yourself by having a business level conversation, helping them understand their financial risk. Uh, yeah, I feel like they look at you a little bit differently, and you're not just the guy with the pocket protector and the tape on your glasses trying to sell them something.
Now, if you use the flux capacitor correctly, you'll be able to go back in time.
Yeah, which I've worn that hat too, so I get it. But
That's right.
no judgment against the hands-on keyboard people, certainly. But when you're sitting down with executives, it hits different when you can have this kind of conversation with them.
Yeah, and honestly, and feel free to push back on this. Sometimes they don't even have to see the graphs. It's more important sometimes for the cybersecurity professional to have gone through this and be able to talk this talk with the knowledge that if they need to, they can bring out the diagrams. Because I'm willing to bet you could probably whiteboard this if you had to stand up in a conference room, if you've already gone through it all without having to bust out a laptop.
Yeah, even just having a risk-based conversation with somebody as opposed to, again, a SKU conversation or a pricing conversation or even a framework conversation. If
Mm-hmm.
you can get it down to talking about risk, that's really what people want to understand and are interested in.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. The man, the myth, the legend, Josh